But staying with the banking and finance sector, Shankar, probably also because you can chip in. You have been quite vocal about the nature of the Indian policy making when it comes to sector, and also about, we have a tendency to imported models from our schools of thoughts rather than our homemade solutions. You touched upon it briefly, but what do you think of the policy measures that have been applied so far, been announced so far, along with the policy steps taken? Can there be any corrective actions that you would recommend, and or recommend or suggest to the RBI, or what would be retail and banking? Could you just dissect it separately? Retail, how it works, and for the corporate banking, how it should be in the future coming out of the pandemic.
Okay, I mean, most of it has been seen in the charts already. I mean, the macros figures are telling us the direction and the trends. One particular chart that we checked was on leverage and how corporates, non-financial corporates, financial corporates, government, and households are leveraged, and how their leverage has gone up over a period of time, and how amongst them all, the government is the one which has really shot up simply because they have not yet unwound the leverage that they did in the financial crisis of 2007-8. So, as Vikas said in the previous thing, the government is trying to fix the balance sheet of the households. And that is, in we the people, that is the only sensible thing you can do if you want to remain in power. Because if a fellow dies of hunger, he's not going to be there to vote. This is the base reality on which any government has to base all its policy on. So your specific question now, as to the earlier question, which is more general, is how banks and the retail side can come out of this crisis. We've already seen banks were already stressed prior to COVID. COVID has only made it worse. Yesterday, the RBI released its financial stability report. And I've still not gone through it fully, but one particular data point in that was, in the last 2 years, the gross NPA has fallen from 9.3 to 8.5. So that's largely due to IBC. And these figures are percentage of GDP again. And the provisioning that the banks have done, when it was at 9.3, they had a provisioning of 61%. And when it is at 8.5, their provisioning is at 66%. So the banks are also cleaning up their balance sheet. But wham, now we have the pandemic. So what is the estimate the RBI is doing? But this is very important because their policy will be based on what is going to happen here. So they are estimating this 8.5 to move up to 12.5 to 14.7. Almost doubling at the worst case scenario, and the best case itself is a 50% expansion. So this is basically going directly to your specific answer on the retail side. Now, this is where the contradiction also starts coming in. Loan growth has collapsed. It's at, I think, 5% or 0%. I mean, it's just collapsing every day. On a day-to-day basis, credit growth is just collapsing. So the retail side growth already is at negative. So if at all any borrowing is happening, it's happening at the corporate level. So it only stands to reason also that the corporate defaults are going to increase. So this is never going to enter microeconomics policy management at all. This is always going to remain a macroeconomic policy initiative, simply because if corporates fail, people lose jobs, they are going to default at retail level. So the government first step, survival. That is 80 crore high-risk individuals in India out of the 130 crore population are the high-risk individuals in this country. They are people who are daily wage earners. They are people earning minimum wage. They are people, even if they have earned little more than that, have never saved for various reasons, because they had some medical emergency or a wedding or XYZ expenditure, because of which either they are in debt or they have never saved. So these 80 crore people would have just died if they couldn't afford the next meal. So as Vikas said, the first step of the government was to make sure people survive. So that they have done. The second step of survival is now we are entering the macros from we the people, because without we the people, there's no government. People die, there's nobody to vote for you. So now we came to the corporates, and exactly like Vikas said, they went with the largest number of corporates. So if you look at the MSME sector, they may be like 95% of the universe, but they may be 10% of manufacturing output. The 5% large companies may be 90% of manufacturing output. Exact data we may have to check, it may be plus minus 5% or minus. That's it. So they are concentrating on the micro and the small. Because if they can survive this, a large proportion of the labor will also survive this. Of course, people are getting paid less. Some people are not getting paid at all. Many companies have instituted rolling furlough systems where people are sent on compulsory leave without pay and others get paid, and even if they get paid less. Whatever. Basically, people are all trying to survive. So far, the government has not yet come out with a fiscal package other than the survival fiscal package. That is, I'll feed you, you won't die. That is the only hit on the government's balance sheet so far. Everything is only liquidity. So a fiscal package from the government is awaited. That will tell us to what extent we can push up our confidence on the consumption side, because now it has to be a consumption-led recovery. You cannot have a production-led recovery. That's not happening. So for consumption to go up, two things the government will have to do. A, start reducing the fear level on the virus. Till that goes down, public is not going to go out. So unless they go out, they are not going to go to a restaurant, they are not going to go to a mall, they are not going to go to a movie, they are not, basically, no activity is happening. That's why your retail is totally hit. So if the government can bring down the fear factor, then actually you can then incentivize the public with some money and say, now go and spend. So this can be in the form of no GST for 1 year. It's a direct fiscal hit. The government is just not taking revenue. To that extent, the government will have to print currency. That's okay. 2007-8 crisis, we didn't print currency. Unlike other governments, thanks to one man, RBI Governor Reddy, because he saw it 3 years before it happened, and he took measures so that made it very unpopular in the financial sector, but it saved the whole economy. So we were one of the most safe economies back then. But now, even with the Dr. Reddy, nobody could have managed this mess. Because here, you shut down consumption. Whereas in 2007, consumption did not die. Liquidity took a hit. Many people who were over leveraged had a problem. But now consumption is dead. So this has to be a consumption-led recovery. There is no doubt about that. Normally, I'm not a economist who stands on the consumption side of things, but on this particular thing, I have no choice but to stand with them. But there's no other way out of this mess. Over to you, Vikas.
Now, there was an interesting question in the sense that, what Western models that we apply to India on an economic standpoint. I would, of course, Shankarji has given a detailed analysis of what needs to be done. But I will mention one point, which has nothing to do with the pandemic and more to do with, how we manage our economy. We have to understand, as I mentioned earlier, that among the larger democracies, I think we are the only one with such a large public sector banking system, which would mean that the job of the RBI governor or RBI in India is very different from the job of the governor of a central bank in, say, UK or US. And I think the normal, and Shankarji can enlighten more on this, but I think the normal job of a central banker nowadays is supposed to be just fighting inflation, which cannot be the case in India. Because in India, I think an RBI governor's job or an RBI's job is not just to fight inflation, which is important. India cannot afford very high price rises, and we have seen that in the 70s, etc., that led to a lot of unrest. But at the same time, to regulate public sector banking. And I think this is where, and I'm making a very controversial point in a personal capacity, and I sometimes feel if you import RBI governors from US universities, I think they put too much emphasis on fighting inflation and less on regulating public sector banks, because that is something they probably don't like, or they don't know. No, or they like, or it is something that is not the glamour part of the job. And let me, again, in a personal capacity, and I might be completely wrong. For example, the current RBI governor, who does not have an economics background, I assume, has been, probably not taken a step wrong during this COVID crisis, because he's, like, and that is why I think a bit, maybe the deputy governor can come from, those very high intellectual, fancy universities, but the governor should possibly be a homegrown guy who knows how to handle public sector banks. Now, I think that, that will, you know, uh, make a difference to the Indian economy. Like as Shankarji talked about Governor Reddy, I am talking about Governor Das. I think these were less glamorous people in the job. That's one. Again, this is in personal capacity. The second point, I'm talking about inflation itself. I think, India does not require very high inflation, as we talked about. It leads to social unrest. But at the same time, it does not require very low inflation either. Because our corporates look at it in nominal terms. So if I am a corporate, I am looking at my revenue top line. 100 has to go to 110. And that is driven by nominal growth of the GDP. It is not driven by real growth. Real growth may be 7%, but if my inflation is only 2%, my 100 will go only to 109. But say if my real growth is not 7%, but 6%, but my inflation is 6, my actual number is going from 100 to 112, and I feel more confident about the whole thing because my top line has grown from 100 to 112. I am incentivized to grow from 100 to 112, even though the real growth is actually lesser. So, in the last few years, I think the government has become, or the RBI has been, a victim of its own success on inflation. You would have heard the term that, real growth rate to government bahut bol raha hai, but it doesn't feel like that. That was the term that was used. Large part of it was because of this inflation. The inflation has come down drastically. In the earlier times, 6% real growth and 7% inflation. That is 13% growth. The company revenues is expanding by 13 rupees, 100 to 113. You feel great. Everybody gets incentives and performance pays because 100 has gone to 113. But if my 100 goes to only 108, even though my real growth rate is high, I don't feel that. So I think these two conundrums, again, in the Indian economy, we have to see. Inflation is not that bad for us. It has to be somewhere in between. It can't be 1%, 2%. So, beyond the point, I think RBI should not, go after inflation. Again, a personal view. And the first, more controversial view, of course, that as a layman that I have observed, I'm laying it on. I might be completely wrong on that. And I have absolutely nothing against, I'm a great admirer of the US academic system. But nevertheless, you're talking about Western solutions imported onto Indian questions. So the Indian question is about public sector bank in the banking system. So RBI needs to be very cognizant of that also, is my view.
Because
Manish Anand.
Very bold thing to say. Yeah. I thought I skirted that question wantedly. Coming to the issue of imported economics, it was not all bad with Dr. Rajan. I mean, he brought in a sense of formalization and institutionalization to the RBI, which was lacking in its 60-year history. So it was not all bad. Yeah, but yeah, okay. On an overall basis, if you want to start grading people, yes, there'll be a plus, there'll be a minus, whatever. Definitely, yes, a homegrown economist scores over a non-homegrown economist. I mean, this holds true not only for India, it holds true for any economy on the planet. Because every economy has its own evolutionary trend. And that doesn't come from reading a book. It comes by living that economics. Why is Modi winning? He came from the streets. It's that simple reason why he's winning. Because he knows what the 80 crore people of this country live on a day-to-day basis. Vajpayee didn't see it, Narasimha Rao didn't see it, and definitely none of the other Congress family members saw it. So possibly the Charan Singh government and the other one or two governments, maybe they saw it, but he's the first true from the son of the soil that we have had. That's why he's winning. So same way for economics also, a homegrown economist who has gone through the evolutionary growth of that economy for an extended period of time, his intuition level will definitely be far better than an imported economist. So totally agree with you, Vikas, on that point that imported economists can be at the level of deputy governors or whatever, but the governor RBI should always be a homegrown economist, preferably an economist at that, not a bureaucrat like the present governor, who is not doing a bad job, but like I said, we could always want more, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Ye dil mange more. Okay, so moving on to, let's say, now the restart has happened in phases across the country in different parts. And now we have discussed in the last few minutes now how this situation is unique and how different it is from the previous crisis, say the global financial crisis or any other crisis. Now, one of the things we've been talking about in our other interactions is that there has been a twin sort of shock to the economy, both on the supply side, no supply, no manufacturing, no industrial activity for an extended period of time, and also on the consumption side, on the demand side. And, like you rightly said, Shankar, that consumption has to pick up for the economic activity has to come back sooner than later, and which is what I think has been the thinking behind restarting the economy with the necessary caveats being applied. Now, I would like your views, both of you, on as the economic activity starts happening, as the wheels of the economy start turning, how are you viewing it from your respective vantage points? How are you viewing the restarting, the reopening? How do you see different sectors coming up to shape?
It's a very linear answer to this. Simple. Every industry, you put the fear factor to it, next to it. And higher the fear factor, longer it takes to recover. Lower the fear factor, faster recovery. So simple. So the one with the highest fear is travel, hotels, restaurants. So they are on the highest fear factor because you feel that the risk of transmission is maximum in these areas. The one with the least would be your manufacturing and other areas because the interaction between B2C is very limited. The product is made and delivered at your house. So the risk is very minimal. So at a very simple level, to answer your question, lower the risk, faster the recovery, higher the risk of infection, longer the recovery. So that's one part of the question. The second part of the question was?
No, it's to do with that. I mean, they're both related in a sense that, how are you viewing the reopening and where do you see the different...
Like I said, the government will have to parachute money into public at some point after they have, like I said, brought down the fear factor so that people will be incentivized to spend. So in what way the government comes out with that policy? Like I said, I'm not a consumption-based economist. And as Vikas was referring to Dr. Rajan, he was a consumption-based economist. I stand with him today. I have no choice because this recovery is going to be led from the consumption side. So no matter how much you produce, if I'm scared to buy your product, you are gone into a worse hell because you have spent an extra X amount of money to restart operations and you're not selling. So the demand has to come first. And obviously, this is the basic rule of economics. Where there is demand, there will be supply. So that will fix itself. Yeah, Vikas.
Yeah, that was very comprehensive answer. But and I'll add a few points to that. Not who will recover, but I think what will it take to recover. I think again very clearly after any crisis, what comes out is people who have better balance sheets do better. Normally in good times we look at P&L. In bad times and in governance, balance sheet and cash flows become more important. So very clearly, people who are able to repair their balance sheets, industries, companies, I would rather say companies who are able to repair their balance sheets faster or who have stronger balance sheets will come out faster, stronger in the economy. The second, for most companies, this is a golden opportunity. We have talked about crisis and how difficult it is to survive and all that. But this is also an opportunity for every company to rethink their business models. You know, as you said, supply is down, consumption is down. For rethinking your business model, there never will be a better time because you have nothing else to do but to rethink your business model. This is the only time you can think about that. And what ails our economy, and we have talked about this again and again, and I think what ails our economy, our industry, our manufacturing, services, everything is productivity. Like, and that is what limits us. And I think low productivity means that we employ a whole army of low wage people to do a job that could have been done in a different manner. So essentially we have condemned a large part of our workforce to low wage jobs because of lack of productivity in the economy. So this is a time where we can rethink improving productivity in our companies. It will be painful in the sense that in the short term it might exacerbate unemployment, because if you start increasing productivity to start off with, I think in the short term less people are required, but as in when you become more and more competitive, your scale of business goes up and you start employing more and more people at higher wages. At the end of the day, that is what a higher productivity economy would do. And this is a chance for companies to think about that, because they have nothing else to do. With 25% capacity utilization, 50% capacity utilization, all the managers are sitting idle. They should start thinking on how to increase productivity. The third aspect that this crisis is teaching us is risk management. Like all of us do risk management, but most of the time our risk management is simply sensitivity analysis. If this thing goes wrong, this will happen. If this thing goes wrong, that will happen. But actually risk management is when more than one factor goes wrong. I think what we can safely conclude is that companies can handle if two things go wrong, but companies can't handle if multiple things go wrong. And that is something we have to think about our risk management practices. How do we handle things going around wrong around multiple drivers? In our case, revenue is down, people are not available because they have gone back home, migrant labor is not available, it is very difficult to work because people are fearful. Not just people are not only fearful about consuming, they are also fearful about coming to work, because like there are so many COVID cases happening in the plants. So there are a whole lot of multiple things going wrong. We really don't know how to handle this. Like we are used to handling one or two failures, and that is like that what is, and our entire management efficiency is driven by that. So this will again teach us how to do risk management better. So I would say my 3 points that I'm saying: better balance sheets, chance to do better your productivity, and chance to rethink your risk management practices and business model. I think there's a lot of opportunity here, not just something bad to look forward to. We can do a lot of good as companies, or as industry, or as any company. We can do a lot of good to our companies during this period.
No, quite right. It's like a multivariate polynomial problem where there are multiple variables sort of moving, and we have never really faced this kind of a situation before. You touched upon